And it talks about, as it says, two miracles. The first one is the feeding of the 5,000, and the second one is Jesus walking on water. So we're gonna read this this part of the passage, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. So this is John 6, 1 through 15. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing, that following Jesus. They saw the signs that Jesus was doing on sin. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand, near, not already happening. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, to test Philip, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in that place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. So the feeding of the 5,000 is just the men, and there were likely women and children there as well. So it was more than just 5,000. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." Years ago, when I was in either high school or college, I heard a pastor teach on this. And what he said was that it wasn't a miracle. It was that people took out what they had to eat, and they shared from that boy's lunch, and they shared from each other. And so it wasn't a miracle. But that doesn't make sense, because if you're going to take, with 5,000 people, actually more like probably 10 to 15,000 people, even if you share lunches, you're not going to get much, right? So, and it says at the end, when they had eaten their fill, they were stopped. If 3 of you, 4 of you, 10 of you share one lunch, are you going to go away going, "Oh, I can't eat the whole thing"? No, you're not. So this is definitely miraculous. So I'll back up a little bit. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world," meaning the Messiah. Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. So I know this is a little bit hard to follow, but the main thing I want you to get from this is that this is the Lake Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee, as it was called in Jesus' day. And that's where the different arrows are, where the curriculum says he went during this. Because what are the first 2 words of this passage? After this. So what have you learned about those 2 words? After this. What's happening there when John writes after this? It's some indeterminate amount of time, but there's some time that elapsed. It's not the next day. It's not the next week. It's some time has elapsed. We don't know how much time has elapsed. We know that at this point, the Passover is near. But if you remember the last chapter, it says a feast of the Jews. The curriculum says that is Passover and a year has passed. But I'm not going to say it's Passover if it doesn't tell me it's Passover. There are 7, 8, 9, I don't know, feasts of the Jews. And so it could have been any one of those. It's an indeterminate time. So I'm not going to do this and say Jesus went here and here and here and here in that year because we don't know for sure. So this is shortly before Passover. This is a picture of the Sea of Galilee as it looks now. And it's the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. And some people think there's a chapel that is not far from here that has these tiles on the floor, mosaic on the floor of a basket with bread and fish. So some people think that this is the place where this happened. It could be. I mean, it looks like what is pictured in the scripture, right? There was much grass there. It was on the lake, and there was much grass there. And that's certainly true of that, but we can't know for sure. So. So during that time, we can't know how much time has elapsed. He is no longer, he was in Jerusalem the last time we saw him, but now he's in Galilee. I don't know, I'm not going to say any more than that because that much we know from Scripture. And we don't know how much time has elapsed. So let's hang on. I'll do this. Okay. So after this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. So it was called the Sea of Galilee in Jesus' day, but at this point, when John's writing later in the 1st century, it was named the Sea of Tiberias. So it's the same thing. It's just 2 different names. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. So they were interested in him because of the miracles. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. So it was near. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of this miracle. Of all of the miracles that are recorded in the Gospels, this is the only miracle that's written about in all 4 Gospels. There's only one that all the Gospels name, and it's this one. So you want to remember that. It's the only one recorded in all 4 Gospels, and that makes it important. Because there's something about this miracle that caught the eye of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and nothing else did. Now, all of his miracles, including raising Lazarus from the dead, were spectacular, were amazing, but there was something about this particular one that everyone wanted to write about. So why is that? Why is that important? Why is this so important? Well, first of all, it was performed in the presence of many more people than the other miracles. Some of the miracles were just one person and the disciples around. I'm thinking of the Syrophoenician woman that we'll talk about maybe a little bit later. She's the one that came asking for her son to be healed. And this, you might remember this story because Jesus says something that seems like it's really nasty. He says he's not going to do it because he doesn't want to give the children's bread to the dogs. And she comes back. She's so desperate. She comes back with, even the dogs get what falls from the table. And he does. He does heal her son. And I can explain that to you. I'm not going to take the time to explain it now. It's not as bad as it sounds. But that was a miracle that was probably just his disciples and Jesus and that woman. But this one was performed in the presence of many more people than the other miracles. Like I said, not 5,000, 5,000 men. We have no idea how many women and children were there as well. Secondly, it was a miracle of creation. Whereas the other miracles, except the turning of water into wine, were miracles of restoration. So somebody's blind and he made them see. Somebody is lame and he made them walk. Somebody's dead and he rose him to life. This one was creating something out of nothing. And so it's not like he tore the little lunch in half and handed it out. He created more than what was there. And then finally, it's a picture of Christ. And I was just reading this yesterday, the Last Supper, where he talked about his body being broken for them. He is the bread of life, and we'll see that in this passage, that he is the bread of life who was broken for us. So it's a picture when he takes that bread and he breaks it and he gives thanks. It's kind of a foreshadowing of his own death. So let's talk a little bit about the occasion of the miracle. So some time passed, and we don't know for sure what all Jesus was doing. He was in Galilee, maybe, but he was moving around during that time, and he needed to rest, as we all do when we've been busy. And so this is going to talk about the lessons from Christ's vacation. I'm just going to tell you, or I'm going to go through this really quickly, because even though rest is important, we need both rest and productivity. If you just rest all the time, if you just become a couch potato, then there's not very much going on that's important in your life. But if all you do is work, that is bad for us as well. So this is not the most important thing, so I'm going to go through it really quickly. So there's nothing wrong with Christian workers taking a rest. I don't know who said that it was, but that it was wrong, but it's true. We need both productivity and rest. And then the second one is that even while resting from earthly pressure, remain ready to serve the Lord. And then the last one is be willing to have your vacation end sooner than planned. So I don't know. We've had the reverse of that the last week or so, right? We were supposed to be in school, and my guess is that you had a good time sleeping in and not doing a whole lot, and I had some time like that, not sleeping in. I can't sleep in, but yeah, you all had some rest, and it probably for you ended too soon. You would have liked it to keep going, right? There's probably a few. Anybody in here like, yeah, I'd rather be at school. Just me. Okay, that's fine. But none of this is really the point of what's going on here. So it's near the time of Passover. We already talked about that. So why do you think John recorded this miracle? Why did he choose this one? Remember, he only picked 7, so he was choosing. It must have had a reason. What do you think it is? It has something to do with John 20:31. Remember what that says? These were written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. He wrote this story for the same reason he wrote all of them. And so with every, and I told you this at the beginning of the year, that with every story we have to ask, what does this tell us about Jesus? Because that's his thesis statement. He wants us to see that he is the Christ, the Son of God. He wants us to see his deity. And so, so it's time for the Passover, and that was and is the most holy feast in Judaism, the most important one in Judaism. And so the fact that Jesus is the Passover lamb is important to this entire story. And he's about to tell the people after this. We'll talk about Jesus saying that he is the bread of life. So what can we tell about Jesus from this? How does this prove his deity? Somebody's got to have some. James, what do you think? You seem to be thinking about something. What do you think? Yeah, it shows his omnipotence, doesn't it? His power to create. And people can create things. You look around my room. There's posters that students have created, but they didn't create it out of nothing. Only God can do that. Now the next one. I think this is a little harsh, the failure of Philip and Andrew. Sorry. So I'm not going to be too hard on them because I don't know. That would be a really difficult thing for them to understand where that food was going to come from. It's not like there's stores nearby where they can feed 15,000 people. Yes. So I wouldn't say it was a failure. I would say that they didn't understand what he was going to do. They couldn't imagine what he was going to do. Why do you think Jesus asked them, "What are you going to do?" He knew what he was going to do. Why did he ask that question? Yeah, and that word test is good, but I prefer it to test them, yes, but I prefer to help them grow in their faith. And isn't it true that when we see something more of God, it grows our faith? Um, I'll go back almost a week. I had the privilege of teaching Caleb, who was our chapel speaker, and he is definitely a new creation in Christ. And he spoke so powerfully, and not just in front of everybody, but to individuals during that time. And it isn't that um, I mean, God is testing us, but He's giving us an opportunity to grow. And I couldn't have imagined. I didn't know until just before school on Thursday, maybe it was Wednesday, that he was speaking. And when I was told he was speaking, I was like, he is? And God had tested his faith, grown his faith. The point it's not a cosmic gotcha. It's an opportunity to grow and to learn and to see more of who God is, to see more of who Christ is in our lives and just uh, in our faith as well. So so he asked him the question to help him grow in his faith. And every trial we meet has that same purpose. We tend to get angry at God and ask that classic question, why? Why did this happen? And that's normal. That's natural. But I think it's better for us to see what God is doing in that trial that he could not otherwise do without the trial. It's true that we grow the most in difficulty, in times of trial. And so that's the purpose of every trial we go through. They obeyed. It says here that Philip and Andrew failed the test. Did they really? They did what Jesus said. They did what Jesus asked them to do. That's a win every time for everyone. If we do what Jesus asks us to do, that's a win. They might have doubted, but that's just human. So they were looking at the outside circumstances rather than the power of God over their circumstances. And we do that too. I do that. I freak out about something, about how I'm going to fix something or how I'm going to make something right, when all along I should be relying on God to take care of me. But even they were looking at their outward circumstances. We do too. But even with all his miracles that they'd seen, they couldn't have dreamed that Jesus would do this, a miracle of creation. And that is impossible apart from God. So let's talk about the miracle. Jesus reveals his sovereignty. Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in that place. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also as the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. So we see in this, we see Christ's sovereignty. He is sovereign. He is omniscient. So he didn't worry about how he was going to feed those people. He knew what was going to happen, and he tested them to grow their faith, as I already said. But more importantly, Jesus wanted Philip and Andrew to know him, who he was, that he was and is the Christ. So, So the other thing is that it requires man's obedience, requires our obedience. Jesus can command things. Jesus can ask things of us. But we have the free will to say, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. And so it requires our obedience if we're going to walk in faith. And sometimes what he asks us to do seems odd. The first thing he said to them was, make the people sit down. Doesn't say why. They might have been like, why do they have to sit down? There's no food. Why would they sit down? It doesn't make any sense. There's no food. And sometimes when God asks something of us, we push back on it. Because we don't understand what he's doing. And just obey. It goes better when you obey. I'm going to tell you, I wasn't planning on telling this story, but it came into my mind, so I'm going to tell you. I don't know how much I've told you about my children, but my oldest son, my oldest child, is Josh. And he, beginning in high school, started walking away from his faith. I didn't know it at first. It took a while for me to know it because he was going through the motions, but he was struggling in his faith. And this is a kid who was a superstar kid, super intelligent, super smart and kind, and he was the kid, in youth group and everything. Is, oh man, he's amazing. And when I say super smart, he got an appointment to the United States Air Force Academy, and you only get that if you're super smart. But what we didn't know, that even before he left for the academy, he was. By the way, I have his I don't know if he knows it's been out. I have his blessing to talk about this. he was struggling in his faith. I didn't know it. I found it out, and my husband didn't believe me. When he came home his sophomore year for some break, I don't remember what it was, in the fall. And he went on a date with his longtime girlfriend. And he came back, and I said, how was it? He said it was fine, and he went to bed. And I got a call from the girl's mother, because we were our friends, and said, what do you think about our kids being there? And I was shocked. And so, and my husband was like, yeah, it makes sense. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. So the next day he was leaving to go back to the academy. And I was sitting at the kitchen table with him, talking to him. And the long and the short of it is that I began to talk about his faith, and his responses were puzzling to me. And I said, Josh, do you want to grow in your faith? And he said, I don't know. And that's the first I realized that he was so far. So fast forward, he goes through a really rough patch. He ends up deciding to leave the Air Force Academy. He's doing all kinds of things. I don't even want to tell you all kinds of things that kept me up at night for his safety. And we don't have time for me to tell all of that. But at some point, I didn't realize that a friend of mine was waking up in the night regularly to pray for Doug. Never knew it until after this. And I got a call from our pastor. And one of those nights, that friend said, God said to that friend, Josh is supposed to go to Zambia. And so she called our pastor, our missions pastor, and said, Josh Keys are supposed to go to Zambia. And so he called me. And he said this was my answer. I said, he's a grown-up. He's going to have to pay for it himself. I'd be shocked if he would go. But if you're asking me, does he understand why we're going? He does. Or if you're asking me, he'll do what you tell him to do, I think so. But I doubt he'll go. He won't. And they were in the bush, and they were playing with children, and there was this little boy named Gift who kept beating up all the other children. He was about 4 years old, maybe 5 years old, and Josh was trying to get him to stop beating up on the other children. Gift was very much like Josh. So he started beating on Josh, and people were like saying, like, what? You know, why are you letting him do that? He said, well, it keeps him from beating up on the kids, and he can't hurt me. And so he decides to take a break. It's hot, and he's under a tree, and he doesn't know what to do, and he has his Bible there. So he starts at Genesis 1:1, and he begins to read out loud. Now, up to this time, Gift had been beating up on the kids, beating up on Josh, being just like a brat. And Josh looked up, and Gift was just entranced listening to him. Doesn't speak English at all. And Josh is speaking in English. And he's listening intently. And when Josh got up, Gift took his hand. And every picture of Josh after that was Gift on Josh's shoulders. Josh swinging Gift around. Hang on. And what he told me after he came home was, Mom, I realized on the trip back to the that I am Gift. And I have spent the last 4 years of my life beating up God and saying, you don't understand me. You don't talk my language. When all the while I should have taken his hand. And I was confessing to God after that. And I said, Lord, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. I knew that you could bring Josh back, but I didn't understand how. And God said to me, that's because you couldn't conceive of an orphan boy named Gift, but I could. And that's how God wants us to obey. It requires our obedience. I'll like to teach.